If your fantasy team has such an amazing week 1 that you can't even think of a way to improve it, no injuries, no busts, your bench is just rock solid, hey, congrats. But for the other 99.9% of us, it's time to look at some waiver wire options. But first, let's go over the injury report. I'd say it wasn't too bad this week. No season enders and not a lot of major injuries to big stars, but of course, there were a couple. And let's start with the big one. On the Sunday night game between the Rams and the Lions, Puka Nacua left with a knee injury, came out of that blue tent, seemed like he was ready to go back in, and then never came back. Now, as of right now, we know it is a knee injury, which is always scary just to hear that. Don't know the extent of it. Obviously, we'll know more as the week goes on. As always, we're going to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. So Puka's absence in the second half cleared the way for a guy named Cooper Kupp to not only get 14 catches and 110 yards with a touchdown, but an insane 21 targets. Yes, 21 targets in the game. Now, what we said is that Demarcus Robinson was a nice late round pick because if injury happens to Kupp or Nacua, we thought that he would be the next man up, but all of a sudden there's a guy named Tyler Johnson who was next in line for targets and receptions. Might know Tyler Johnson is a guy who had a prolific career at the University of Minnesota, but has not done a whole lot in the pros. Spent a couple years with Tampa, and then the last 2 seasons between Houston and the Rams, yes, he was technically on the Rams last year, a combined 3 targets and 2 receptions for the last 2 seasons. I'm not saying go out and pick him up, just keep an eye out for him. I think Demarcus Robinson still is the one to get. Then let's rewind to the Friday night game, that big one, the very last or second to last play of the game. Jordan Love went down. We do know for him, it is a sprained MCL, and the estimated timeline right now is 3 to 6 weeks. We don't know exactly, but we know he's definitely not playing the next couple. If you drafted Jordan Love as your starting quarterback, as I did in multiple leagues, you're going to need a replacement. I'll talk about some when I go over my top waiver wire pickups. Right now in Green Bay, this could be ugly because technically the backup quarterback is Malik Willis, who is not only Malik Willis, but also he's only been there a couple of weeks. They just scooped him up off of waivers. He does not know the system. They might go to somebody like a Ryan Tannehill or elsewhere in the free agent market. Either way, this is definitely a concern, not only if you had Love, but if you had any of these Packers receivers. Then on Sunday, couple of receivers did go out with some nagging injuries. Jordan Addison had an ankle thing, and they said after the game he avoided a major injury. Of course, it doesn't mean he's good to go for next week, but we shall see. Jalen Naylor did catch a 21-yard touchdown, next in line, just saying. I also wouldn't make a point of going out to add him. Addison might be fine. I wouldn't worry about it. He shouldn't be a must start for your league anyways. And the veteran Keenan Allen, he was already questionable throughout the week, and he seemed to be limping after an end zone target that sailed over his head, didn't catch it, but it came up hobbling. You know that he's had injuries throughout his career. This is the first season in Chicago. Well, we don't know what his status is going to be, but definitely something to keep your eye on. It was a rough weekend for tight ends just across the board in many ways, but especially in Cleveland and for David Njoku, one of the few players who was doing anything in that offense, and then he left with an ankle issue, and now it sounds like it might be a high ankle sprain. You know what that means? He's going to be out for multiple weeks. So, and the way that Cleveland offense looks, I don't think I can really wholeheartedly recommend anyone as a replacement, but especially at tight end. I just think if you had Njoku, you're going to have to start looking at the streaming options. And then in that same game, other tight end Jake Ferguson for Dallas also left. This was a knee issue. Now, thankfully, after the game, it sounds like he avoided the worst. It's not an ACL tear. Could be MCL. Again, the severity is still undetermined as of right now. This is really interesting because you'd think the tight end in that offense would still be valuable. They do have a guy in Luke Schoonmaker who was a second-round pick out of Michigan a couple years ago, and he's ready to step in because you remember their other tight end, Peyton Hendershot, was actually traded to Jacksonville during the preseason. So they don't have a lot of depth at the position anymore, but Schoonmaker, talented guy, has never really done much in the NFL, but now maybe has his chance. And then this happened before the games even started Sunday, but I think it's worth mentioning. T. Higgins. We all know about T. Higgins. This is just what he does, and by that I mean he's just not reliable. Sounds like a hamstring issue. This could keep him out another week, maybe more. High re-injury risk, according to those who know these sorts of things. And there's the fact that the Bengals offense was horrible against a bad Patriots team. Are you worried? You should be. And if Andrei Iosivich sounded like a great alternative, he wasn't. Honestly, I'm leaving this entire offense alone for right now, other than Jamar Chase. All right, now it's time to tell you who you should be in on and who's worth spending your fab on. And at the end, I'll actually tell you a couple players that you shouldn't bother with. But first, let's get to the obvious. That very first game of the 2024 season was that Thursday night matchup between the Ravens and the Chiefs. And of course, as we all expected, the star of the game was Isaiah Likely. 9 catches, 111 yards, and a touchdown, and inches away from having a second touchdown that would have tied the game at the very end. I mean, he was by far the star of the game, not just for Baltimore, but he outclassed both Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce. Meanwhile, the supposed starter Andrews only had 2 receptions for 14 yards. Now, before we go and start dropping Mark Andrews to pick up Likely, or just assuming we could roll out Likely the rest of the season, I do have to be the voice of reason here. Now, it's been discussed a lot, and we talk about this on our Discord and our live shows. The Chiefs made this happen, and this was intentional. They took Andrews out of the equation. They know that this is what the Ravens like to do across the middle of the field. Target, well, Lamar Jackson's favorite target has been Andrews throughout the year, so he was blanketed on most of his routes, double, sometimes triple teamed, and they let Likely go. The Ravens, smartly to their credit, saw that they weren't going to be able to feed Andrews, and so Likely was the beneficiary. But this isn't going to happen every week, and of course, this is the Chiefs in Arrowhead. It's a tough matchup, right? Likely was able to take advantage of what the Chiefs defense was doing, but Baltimore's going to be running ahead in a lot of these games going forward. They're not going to play the Chiefs every single week, and Likely's not going to be the main guy. Derrick Henry will have better days. Mark Andrews will have better days. Isaiah Likely is still fantasy viable, though, which is why I'm telling you, you can pick him up as long as you are realistic about your expectations. If you were streaming tight end, if you potentially just lost David Njoku or Jake Ferguson, yes, go ahead and pick up Likely. If you're looking to replace Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce or Dalton Kincaid or any of the number of tight ends who were disappointing week 1, don't do that. All right, now a former Raven who also took us by surprise. I'll just come out and admit I expected week 1 to be a big Gus Edwards game. We knew the Chargers wanted to run the ball. We knew that they would be able to, most likely against the Raiders. I didn't think it would be J.K. Dobbins who was the one to rip off the long runs. So Gus Edwards was technically the league rusher in terms of touches. He had 11 carries. Dobbins only had 10. The problem is Gus the Bus was stopped short almost every time he touched the ball, only 26 rushing yards, while Dobbins on his 10 attempts, 135 yards and a touchdown. That included a 60-plus yard run. That's something that we haven't seen Dobbins do in a long time because he's always been hurt. Now, you probably also noticed that just like a couple years ago, Dobbins, in that long run, slowed down at the end. He didn't have the gas in order to keep going and make it to the end zone. Could have had an even bigger day. But hey, I think you'll take what you got from him based on the way he looked. He definitely has some juice left. And if this is going to be a strict timeshare, well, Dobbins is still going to get double-digit carries because this team is going to run the ball so much. We talked about this all off season. So while Justin Herbert and this Chargers offense against, an okay but not amazing Raiders defense, they passed the ball 26 times. They ran the ball 27 times. More rushing yards than passing yards. Get used to it. This is going to be the new look Chargers offense. So obviously, given Dobbins' injury history, you can't feel secure thinking that you can depend on him as your RB2 or 3 or whatever the whole season long. But hey, if he's healthy right now and he does look as healthy as he could possibly get given all his injuries, he's definitely worth adding. Now, aside from those who waited on QB, like to stream the position, we know that a lot of you, myself included, are going to need a quarterback at least for the next couple of weeks because of the Jordan Love injury. So you don't want to go to whoever Green Bay has the backup, which we don't even know who that is. Is it time to go with Justin Fields? Now, this is a tricky one. I will say you can pick up Justin Fields, but we're going to have to keep a close eye on the situation because we don't know what's going on with Russell Wilson. The calf injury obviously kept him out of week 1. He sounded like he wanted to play. The trainer said no. Is he going to play week 2? Well, technically the Steelers got the win, but really not because of their offense. It was because of their kicker and their defense. but Justin Fields might have done enough to secure himself another start if Wilson isn't 100%. So Fields didn't do anything amazing through the air. 156 passing yards, no touchdowns, but he also didn't throw an interception. 14 carries for 57 yards. That was good enough. He moved the chains, didn't turn it over. This is going to also be a very run-heavy offense. I mean, between the Steelers and the Chargers, it's going to be a competition to see who leads the league in rush attempts. Pittsburgh ran the ball 41 times in this game. Now, they could afford to do that because they were never really trailing and Atlanta's offense never got going, but I think this is going to be the recipe because that receiving core is just so non-existent after George Pickens, to be honest. And with the quarterback situation unsettled and Justin Fields as your quarterback, yeah, you're going to run the ball. And this is good for Justin Fields because that's his main trait is, yes, he can sling the deep ball, but you want him running. That's where he helps you in fantasy. If Justin Fields gets another start, I think you can feel pretty safe putting him in that quarterback position if you did lose Jordan Love. The Steelers are on the road next week, but it's against the Broncos. That doesn't scare me. We even saw Geno Smith running for a touchdown on week 1. Kevin Walker had his way in week 1. I think Justin Fields will be just fine. If you want more of a sure thing at the quarterback position, and I guess Baker Mayfield is a sure thing nowadays, hey, you got to look at the guy who just had a big game. I know it was against Washington, right? I get this. This was one of the worst pass defenses. In fact, technically the worst pass defense in terms of fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks last season. It looks like they're well on their way this year again, despite Dan Quinn being the head coach. 4 touchdowns for Baker, 289 yards, and they're looking even better because Mike Evans is still Mike Evans. Chris Godwin looking as good as ever. And they actually have a legit number 3 receiver, rookie Jalen McMillan, showed out with a touchdown. Could have had another if not for a DPI in the end zone. Now, Mayfield and the Bucs won't be playing the Commanders next week, but they get the Lions. That was also one of the worst secondaries last season. Didn't look amazing so much on Sunday night either. I would definitely roll Mayfield out in that matchup. And again, we're looking long term. If you're replacing Jordan Love, you could just keep Mayfield in there, especially if you're a little wary of Justin Fields or if Justin Fields does somehow get relegated to the bench because of Russell Wilson. Mayfield is going to get the Lions next, and then the Broncos, that same defense. The Eagles, who also looked horrible on defense their first game, and the Falcons. So Mayfield is pretty safe as an option here. He's available in more than half of all fantasy leagues right now. So if you're a Jordan Love owner, this might be your best move. And there's another buck I think is worth adding here, although the numbers don't jump off the page. Bucky Irving could be taking over this backfield sooner than we even imagined. Now, Irving got a lot of not just hype, but praise directly from his head coach, Todd Bowles, praise from his new offensive coordinator. I mean, everybody loves this guy, right? He was good in college, obviously one of the better running back prospects in this draft class, which wasn't the best running back class, but still, this guy had an opening. He has taken advantage, and then we thought, well, we got to wait here, right? Rookie running backs don't always make an impact week 1, and Rachaad White is still the guy. But is he? White got more carries, 15 of them, only 31 yards. Still not looking very efficient, as he hasn't really been his whole career as a rusher. A lot of his production came as a receiver. Last year, Rachaad White only averaged 3.6 yards per attempt. The year before that, 3.7. You got to be at least at the 4 mark. Well, in his debut as a Buck, Bucky Irving, 9 carries, 62 yards. It honestly might not be much longer until we see Irving getting more carries than Rachaad White, and White's relegated to that 3rd down role. I just finished talking about Tampa Bay having a pretty good schedule in terms of the opposing defenses. Don't wait on this. Grab Bucky Irving now, especially if you have White. And could we see another backfield takeover in the state of Florida? Tank Bigsby looked a lot better than Travis Etienne and got a lot more touches than we even expected. Yes, Doug Peterson had talked up Tank having more of a role. That's nothing surprising here. It's why we thought Tank was a very nice late best ball pick and, maybe a stash, somebody worth keeping an eye on. But just look at the very first game of the season. Both Bigsby and Etienne had the same number of carries. That would be 12. And while Travis Etienne went for 44 yards, including a fumble on the goal line, Tank Bigsby went for 73 yards on those 12 carries. Realistically, this just could turn into a 50-50 timeshare. I mean, that's exactly what we saw in week 1. Why wouldn't it be the same going forward? I'm not saying Etienne will be completely out of the picture, but Spending a third round pick on Etienne versus spending a last round pick on Bigsby, getting similar results in the end, you're going to be regretting that early pick on Etienne, just saying. Well, Bigsby didn't get the touchdown. I know Etienne did. Etienne is still the guy you're going to start right now, but again, Bigsby definitely worth having if you're looking for running back help. And then a deep league special here, or maybe just a deep bench special if you're looking for some upside. Believe it or not, there is a giant player besides Malik Neighbors who does have some potential here. It's the guy I've been talking about all offseason, Wan'Dale Robinson. Now, I know he didn't do a whole lot, 6 receptions, 44 yards, but I think it is definitely worth noting that he led the team with 12 targets. Now, those 12 targets were extremely low, average depth of target, and that's exactly what I have been saying to expect, and it's exactly what makes him valuable, because this is pretty much all Daniel Jones can do. This is why I was worried about Malik Neighbors, drafting him so high. This is why I'm in on Robinson. He is probably going to lead this team in targets. Sure, you say getting 5 yards here, 6 yards there isn't very helpful, but it is when he breaks one for a touchdown. It is when he gets one in the end zone, and it's going to happen eventually. So I'm keeping an eye on Robinson. Follow the target share. That usually leads to fantasy production. And oh yeah, if you're still looking for a replacement for any receiver or maybe a flex with upside next week, it just so happens that the Giants do get that Washington Commanders secondary. And now that I told you who to pick up, I'm also going to do a little public service here. I'm going to tell you some of the guys I'm not going to add or chase in the waiver wire, especially week 1. There's always guys that go off and then do very little or nothing the rest of the season. So here's my don't bother list for this week. Number 1, Alec Pierce. I mean, if you were surprised to see Alec Pierce go for 125 yards and a touchdown, that's because he has never done that before, and he'll probably never do it again. In his first 2 years in the NFL, Pierce has exactly one 100-yard game on his resume, and it was exactly 100 yards because of one big play. That's what happened here. I guess technically it was 2 big plays, but if you actually saw either of those plays, it was Anthony Richardson getting in trouble, rolling back in the pocket, and just heaving the ball up for grabs. I don't think he was even looking when he threw the ball, which made it even more impressive that it was just a dime. It somehow was perfectly to Alec Pierce's hand in stride. So call it luck, call it skill, whatever. But this was kind of a fluky thing that happens. Look, Ashton Dulin, also the Colts, had a 50-plus yard touchdown. I'm not picking up Ashton Dulin, so don't do this with Pierce. Once in a while, he'll get one of these deep shots. Most of the time, he'll do nothing. Number 2, don't bother with Alexander Mattison. So you might see how he was on the field more than Zamir White, more snaps, and he's the guy who scored a touchdown, 4 catches, 43 yards. Like, okay, maybe there's a third down roll here. Maybe he's going to take over. I don't think so. Look, this is a game where the Raiders didn't really move the ball too effectively, too often. Mattison did have that one. Give him credit. Really nice play when he hurdled a defender and the other guy missed. So give him that one touchdown. He earned it. Other than that, he really didn't do anything as a rusher and not enough as a receiver to give him some fantasy juice. Overall, this offense is not going to be that great. I think there will be better days ahead for Zamir White. Mattison, it's just not enough. And then next week, even if you considered it for some reason, the Raiders are at the road against the Ravens. I'm guessing Mattison does nothing. And then don't bother. Number 3, Derek Carr. I mean, this kind of goes for the whole Saints offense because, let's face it, Carolina is still horrible and might get the number 1 pick again because they are just awful, and it showed. So good on the Saints. Won another season opener. Derek Carr was sharp from the beginning. That deep bomb to Shaheed. 3 touchdowns on the day, and maybe could have put up bigger numbers if they actually had to pass at all in the second half. But again, this was just an overmatched opponent in Carolina. Don't think Derek Carr will have too many more days like this. He will once in a while, but we've known what Derek Carr has been for a while. Don't forget, besides waiver wire help, we have everything you need to help you win in fantasy. Check out the week 2 playlist right here.